Picture this: you're standing in your childhood bedroom, wearing a museum security uniform that your entire family treats like a costume from a failed Halloween party. Your investment banker sister just finished bragging about her latest seven-figure bonus to a room full of relatives, while your tech entrepreneur brother casually mentions his startup's newest funding round. Then all eyes turn to you, and someone inevitably asks, "So Sarah, still playing security guard with the dinosaurs?" The laughter that follows cuts deeper than any knife ever could. I'm Sarah Martinez, and 6 months ago, that was my reality. My family saw me as the girl who peaked in college and settled for minimum wage and a flashlight. They had no idea that my embarrassing little job was actually a cover for one of the most classified operations in federal law enforcement. They couldn't have imagined that while they were moving money and building apps, I was tracking international crime syndicates and preventing terrorist attacks. But everything changed the morning FBI agents showed up at my apartment door, badges gleaming in the dawn light, and said the words that would shatter my family's perception forever: "Director Martinez, we need your authorization for Operation Nightfall." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the Martinez household meant understanding your place in an invisible but very real pecking order. At the top sat my older sister Jessica, a force of nature who'd been destined for greatness since she aced her SATs and got early admission to Wharton. Below her, my younger brother Alex occupied the golden child position, the baby who could do no wrong and seemed to turn everything he touched into digital gold. Then there was me, Sarah, perpetually stuck in the middle, with my quiet observations and strange fascination with patterns that nobody else seemed to notice or care about. Jessica had always been the family's crown jewel. Even at 16, she was reading the Wall Street Journal at breakfast and explaining market fluctuations to our bewildered parents. By the time she graduated from business school, Goldman Sachs was already courting her with offers that made our father's yearly salary look like pocket change. She lived in a Manhattan penthouse now, wore designer suits that cost more than most people's cars, and commanded respect in rooms full of powerful men who moved billions of dollars with a single phone call. Alex represented the new generation of success, the kind that made no sense to our parents but clearly worked in a world where teenagers could become millionaires by creating apps in their bedrooms. He dropped out of Stanford junior year to launch a fintech startup that somehow managed to revolutionize how small businesses handled payments. By 24, he was featured on magazine covers with headlines like "The Kid Who Disrupted Banking," and giving TED Talks about innovation to audiences twice his age. They were both brilliant in ways that society immediately recognized and rewarded. Jessica's intelligence manifested in sharp business acumen and an ability to see profitable opportunities where others saw confusion. Alex possessed that rare combination of technical skill and entrepreneurial vision that could transform abstract ideas into concrete solutions that millions of people actually wanted to use. My intelligence, on the other hand, had always been different. Where Jessica saw numbers and market trends, I saw behavioral patterns and inconsistencies. Where Alex saw technological solutions, I noticed human motivations and the small details that revealed larger truths. I remembered faces, voices, and seemingly insignificant conversations that most people forgot within minutes. But these weren't skills that translated easily into conventional success metrics. You couldn't put "exceptional observational abilities" on a resume and expect HR departments to understand what that meant. There wasn't a clear career path for someone whose superpower was noticing when people were lying or remembering exactly how someone had moved through a space 3 weeks earlier. Our parents, Maria and Roberto Martinez, were hardworking people who'd built a comfortable middle-class life through decades of steady employment and careful saving. Dad worked as a supervisor at a manufacturing plant, Mom as a nurse at the local hospital. They understood Jessica's path because business success was something they could measure and explain to their friends. They celebrated Alex's achievements because even if they didn't fully grasp the technology, they could see the recognition and financial rewards it brought. My path, however, remained a mystery that seemed to worry them more with each passing year. During family dinners, the conversation inevitably centered around Jessica's latest corporate victory or Alex's newest venture. Jessica would regale us with stories of merger negotiations and international business trips, her confidence filling the room like expensive perfume. Alex would explain his latest product development or share anecdotes about meeting with venture capitalists who threw around investment figures that sounded like lottery winnings. When attention eventually turned to me, the energy in the room would shift noticeably. My parents would try to find something positive to say about my modest job at the Metropolitan Museum of Natural History, but their forced enthusiasm only highlighted how little they understood what I actually did or why it mattered. Sarah's working at that beautiful museum downtown, Mom would tell relatives, her voice carrying a tone that suggested she was making the best of a disappointing situation. She's in security, making sure all those priceless artifacts stay safe. The word security always seemed to hang in the air like an apology, as if she were explaining why her daughter had settled for so little when her siblings had achieved so much. Jessica, to her credit, never intentionally tried to make me feel inferior. Her success was so overwhelming that she didn't need to diminish others to feel good about herself. But her very presence at family gatherings served as a constant reminder of what ambition and drive could accomplish. She'd arrive in her Tesla, wearing clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary, checking her phone constantly as international markets demanded her attention even during family time. Alex was similarly absorbed in his own world of venture capital meetings and product launches. He'd show up to family events straight from the airport, having just returned from conferences in Silicon Valley or meetings with potential international partners. His casual mentions of seven-figure funding rounds and acquisition offers weren't meant to intimidate, but they had that effect nonetheless. The contrast became especially stark during holiday gatherings when extended family members would inevitably ask about our careers. Jessica's updates read like press releases from a Fortune 500 company. Alex's story sounded like science fiction becoming reality. My contributions to these conversations felt increasingly irrelevant, reduced to vague statements about keeping the museum secure that satisfied no one's curiosity and left me feeling like I was failing some fundamental test of adult achievement. What made the situation more complex was that I genuinely loved my work, even if I couldn't explain why or share the details that made it meaningful. There was something deeply satisfying about maintaining vigilance over irreplaceable pieces of human history, about being trusted with the protection of artifacts that connected us to civilizations thousands of years old. The quiet moments walking through galleries after closing time, surrounded by the accumulated treasures of human creativity and ingenuity, filled me with a sense of purpose that I couldn't articulate to people who measured success in dollars and recognition. But try explaining that to relatives who wanted to know about promotions, salary increases, and 5-year career plans. Try describing the satisfaction of a job well done when that job appeared to require nothing more than standing still and watching for trouble that rarely materialized. The most painful moments came when well-meaning family members would try to offer career advice or suggest alternative paths that seemed more suitable for someone with my education and intelligence. Aunt Carmen would mention openings at the bank where she worked. Uncle Miguel would suggest I consider real estate like my cousin Patricia, who was apparently killing it in the suburban housing market. Even my grandmother would occasionally ask when I planned to find a husband who could provide the stability that my career clearly wasn't offering. These conversations always left me feeling like I was living my life wrong, like I'd somehow missed a crucial instruction manual that everyone else had received about how to translate intelligence and education into recognizable success. Jessica and Alex had figured out the code, had discovered how to turn their talents into achievements that impressed strangers and made our parents proud to brag about their children. I remained the family enigma, the daughter who'd done everything right academically but somehow couldn't seem to translate that success into a career that anyone else understood or valued. What none of them realized was that my simple job had already become something far more complex and important than anything they could have imagined. While they saw me as stuck in a dead-end position, I was actually being evaluated for opportunities that would eventually place me at the center of international law enforcement operations involving billions of dollars and national security implications. But that transformation was still months away, hidden behind layers of security clearances and classified protocols that I couldn't have explained even if I'd wanted to. For now, I remained the family disappointment, the sister who'd settled for security work while her siblings conquered their respective worlds. The weight of their expectations and my apparent failure to meet them had become a constant presence in my life, a voice that questioned every decision and reminded me daily that I was falling short of my potential. Family gatherings became exercises in defensive explanations and awkward silences, moments when I felt most acutely aware of the gap between who I was supposed to be and who I actually was. Little did any of us know that gap was about to close. In the most dramatic and unexpected way possible, transforming not just how my family saw me, but how I understood my own place in the world. The roots of my fascination with observation and pattern recognition stretched back to childhood, long before I understood these traits might someday become valuable professional skills. While other kids played typical games, I found myself drawn to watching and understanding why people did what they did. During family gatherings, I'd position myself in corners where I could observe the entire room, cataloging facial expressions, noting voice inflections, and remembering conversations that adults thought children weren't paying attention to. My mother first noticed this tendency when I was 7 years old. During a neighborhood barbecue, I correctly predicted which couples would argue before the evening ended, simply by watching their body language and listening to the subtle tensions in their conversations. When Mrs. Rodriguez and her husband had their public disagreement by the grill, exactly as I'd whispered to my mother an hour earlier, she looked at me with a mixture of pride and concern. Sarah has always been observant, she'd tell people, as if my attention to detail was both a gift and a burden she didn't quite know how to handle. As I grew older, this natural inclination toward surveillance and analysis became more pronounced. In high school, I could tell when classmates were lying about homework assignments, when teachers were having personal problems that affected their mood, and when something was wrong at home with friends who tried to hide family troubles. These insights made me a trusted confidant for many people, but they also set me apart in ways that sometimes felt isolating. While my peers were focused on typical teenage concerns like dating, sports, and social hierarchies, I found myself reading psychology textbooks and criminology articles that I discovered online. The local library became my second home, where I'd spend hours studying books about behavioral analysis, forensic science, and investigative techniques. The librarian, Mrs. Patterson, eventually started ordering specialized materials for me. Intrigued by this teenager who seemed genuinely fascinated by subjects that most adults found dry and academic. "You have an unusual mind, Sarah," she told me one afternoon as she handed me a book about criminal profiling techniques. "Most people see the surface of things. You seem to see the machinery underneath." My parents, however, viewed this intellectual curiosity with growing concern. They'd always encouraged education and learning, but my interests seemed to drift further from practical career applications with each passing year. When college application time arrived, they pushed hard for me to consider business, nursing, or education, fields where my people skills could translate into stable employment and recognizable professional achievement. "Sarah, you're smart enough to do anything," my father would say during our kitchen table conversations about my future. "But you need to think practically. This criminal justice stuff is interesting as a hobby, but what kind of career does it really offer? Police work is dangerous and doesn't pay well. Federal agencies only hire the top 1% of applicants. You need something more realistic." My mother approached the subject with gentler but equally persistent pressure. "We just want you to be secure and happy," she'd explain while reviewing college brochures. "Look at your cousin Maria. She became a teacher, has summers off, great benefits, and everyone respects educators. Or think about nursing like Aunt Rosa." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There's always demand for nurses, and the money is good. These criminal justice programs sound exciting, but what do they actually lead to? Their concerns weren't unreasonable. They'd worked hard to provide opportunities for their children that they'd never had themselves, and they wanted to see concrete returns on that investment. Jessica's path toward business success made perfect sense to them. Alex's early aptitude for technology, while less familiar, clearly had profit potential. In an increasingly digital world, my fascination with criminal behavior and investigative techniques seemed like an expensive way to prepare for unemployment. The pressure intensified during my senior year of high school when college decisions loomed large. Family dinner conversations increasingly centered around my plans, with everyone offering opinions about what I should study and what careers I should consider. Jessica, home for Christmas break during her junior year at Wharton, was particularly vocal about the importance of choosing a practical major. "Sarah, you're really good with people," she'd say, using the tone she'd probably learned in her business communication classes. "That's a valuable skill in sales, marketing, or client relations. You could make serious money in business development if you get the right training. This criminal justice stuff might be interesting, but it's not going to pay the bills or give you the lifestyle you deserve." Alex, despite being younger, had developed strong opinions about career planning based on his early success with technology projects. "The future is in tech and data," he'd argue. "Even if you want to work in law enforcement, everything is becoming digital. You should learn programming and data analysis. Those skills transfer to any field and command high salaries." But their practical advice felt like asking me to abandon the part of myself that felt most authentic and alive. When I tried to explain the satisfaction I found in solving puzzles, in understanding human motivation, in piecing together complex patterns from seemingly unrelated information, my family would nod politely but clearly didn't understand why. These interests couldn't be channeled into more profitable directions. The situation became more tense when I was accepted into the criminal justice program at the state university with a partial scholarship. The financial aid made the decision easier for my parents to accept, but their enthusiasm remained lukewarm. At best, they attended my high school graduation with pride, but I could sense their ongoing worry about my chosen path. "We support your education," my mother told me the night before I left for college. "We just hope you'll keep an open mind about other possibilities. Maybe you'll discover interests you didn't know you had. College is about exploring options, not limiting yourself to one narrow field." My freshman year at university confirmed both my passion for criminal justice studies and my family's concerns about its practical applications. I excelled in courses on criminology, forensic science, and investigative procedures, often earning the highest grades in classes while my professors praised my natural aptitude for analytical thinking. But when I'd call home to share these academic victories, my parents' responses felt subdued compared to their excitement about Jessica's internship prospects or Alex's latest programming achievements. The disconnect became more apparent during family visits home. While Jessica would regale everyone with stories about her business school experiences, networking events, and internship opportunities at prestigious companies, my academic achievements seemed to generate polite interest at best. When I tried to explain a fascinating case study we'd analyzed in my forensic psychology class, eyes would glaze over, and someone would inevitably change the subject to more comfortable topics. "Sarah's really passionate about her studies," my mother would tell relatives, using a tone that suggested passion was nice but not necessarily practical. "She's learning about police work and investigating crimes. Very interesting stuff." The word "interesting" became a code for impractical but harmless, a way to acknowledge my academic success without suggesting it led anywhere meaningful. This subtle dismissal hurt more than direct criticism would have, because it reduced my deepest interests to mere curiosities rather than legitimate professional preparation. During my sophomore year, I tried to bridge this gap by exploring internship opportunities that might demonstrate the career potential in my field. I applied to local police departments, the district attorney's office, and various federal agencies, hoping to gain experience that would both enhance my education and prove to my family that criminal justice studies could lead to real opportunities. Most of these applications resulted in polite rejections or referrals to unpaid volunteer positions that didn't offer substantial learning experiences. The few paid internships I found were highly competitive, with hundreds of applicants for each position. My grades were strong, but I lacked the connections and specialized experience that many other candidates possessed. This series of rejections reinforced my family's skeptical attitude about my chosen field. "See, Sarah," my father would say, not unkindly but with obvious frustration, "these government jobs are impossible to get, and even when you do find something, the pay is terrible compared to what Jessica and Alex are tracking toward. Maybe it's time to consider other options." The comparison to my siblings became a constant undercurrent in family conversations. Jessica had secured a summer internship at a major investment firm that paid more than many people's full-time salaries. Alex had started freelancing as a web developer while still in high school, earning money that allowed him to buy his own car and save for college expenses. Meanwhile, I was grateful to find an unpaid position helping with filing and data entry at the county courthouse. The experience at the courthouse, however, proved more valuable than anyone anticipated. While my official duties were mundane, I spent my breaks observing courtroom proceedings, studying how attorneys presented cases, and learning about the complex relationships between law enforcement, legal professionals, and the justice system. The court clerks, recognizing my genuine interest and attention to detail, began giving me increasingly responsible tasks that provided insight into how criminal cases moved through the system. More importantly, this exposure helped me understand that criminal justice was a vast field encompassing many different career paths, not just traditional police work. I learned about forensic accounting, cybercrime investigation, intelligence analysis, and specialized federal agencies that most people never heard of. These discoveries expanded my sense of possibility while also highlighting how much specialized knowledge and training would be required to access the most interesting opportunities. But when I tried to share these insights with my family, their responses remained lukewarm. They were glad I was gaining experience, but they continued to view my interests as impractical detours from more sensible career paths. The subtle but persistent message was that I was smart enough to do better, that I was somehow wasting my potential on a field that would never provide the security and recognition that my abilities deserved. This ongoing family skepticism created an internal tension that affected my confidence and decision-making throughout college. Part of me remained passionate about criminal justice and excited about the possibilities I was discovering. But another part of me wondered if my parents were right, if I was being naive about the realities of government employment and the limitations of careers in law enforcement. The doubt became especially pronounced during my junior year when several professors suggested I consider graduate school or specialized training programs that could enhance my career prospects. These opportunities were exciting but also expensive and time-consuming, with no guarantee of leading to the kind of stable, well-paying positions that my family valued. Meanwhile, Jessica was receiving multiple job offers before her graduation, and Alex was already earning substantial income from his technology projects. By my senior year, I developed a defensive attitude about my chosen field that sometimes made family conversations uncomfortable. When relatives would ask about my plans after graduation, I'd respond with detailed explanations about federal hiring processes and specialized training programs, trying to convince them that my path had real potential for success. But these explanations often sounded more like attempts to convince myself than confident presentations of a well-planned career strategy. The culmination of this family skepticism came during my college graduation ceremony. While my parents were genuinely proud of my academic achievement, their conversations with other family members revealed their ongoing uncertainty about what I planned to do with my degree. When people asked about my post-graduation plans, my mother would mention that I was looking into government work in a tone that suggested this was a temporary phase rather than a serious career commitment. The job search that followed graduation confirmed many of my family's concerns about the practical limitations of my chosen field. Despite strong grades and relevant internship experience, finding entry-level positions in criminal justice proved challenging and frustrating. Federal agencies had lengthy application processes that could take months or years to complete. Local law enforcement agencies often preferred candidates with military experience or specialized training that I lacked. Private sector opportunities in security or investigation were limited and often paid less than entry-level positions in business or technology. After months of applications and interviews that led nowhere, I began to wonder if my family had been right all along about the impracticality of my career aspirations. The student loan payments were starting, my savings from part-time jobs were dwindling, and I was living in my childhood bedroom while my siblings were launching impressive careers in their respective fields. The pressure to accept anything, that would demonstrate forward progress became overwhelming. When the Metropolitan Museum of Natural History posted an opening for a security position that required a college degree and offered decent benefits, I applied more out of desperation than enthusiasm. The job description was straightforward: maintain security in public galleries, monitor visitor behavior, respond to emergencies, and ensure the protection of priceless artifacts and exhibits. It wasn't the career in federal law enforcement that I'd envisioned, but it was stable employment that utilized my educational background in some capacity. More importantly, it would allow me to move out of my parents' house and begin building some semblance of adult independence, even if the work itself seemed like a significant step down from my original aspirations. The interview process for the museum security position revealed both my qualifications and the limitations of my current situation. The hiring manager, Mrs. Rebecca Thompson, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd spent decades in various security roles before joining the museum's administrative staff. She reviewed my resume with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen countless applications from overqualified candidates seeking stable employment. Criminal justice degree from the state university, good grades, courthouse internship experience. She noted, looking up from the papers. You're clearly capable of more challenging work than walking around galleries making sure people don't touch the exhibits. Why are you interested in this position? The question forced me to confront the gap between my educational aspirations and my current employment reality. I could have offered a polished response about my passion for cultural preservation or my interest in museum operations, but something about Mrs. Thompson's direct manner encouraged honesty instead. I've been trying to find work in federal law enforcement for 8 months, I admitted. The application processes are incredibly slow, and most agencies want experience that I don't have yet. I need steady income while I continue pursuing those opportunities, and I'd rather work in security than take a completely unrelated job just to pay bills. Mrs. Thompson nodded with what seemed like understanding rather than judgment. That's refreshingly honest. Most people try to convince me they've always dreamed of protecting Renaissance paintings. The truth is, museum security can be good training for other law enforcement roles if you approach it seriously. You'll learn to observe crowds, identify potential problems before they escalate, and work with various law enforcement agencies when situations require outside intervention. The job offer came 3 days later with a starting salary that was modest but adequate for basic living expenses. The benefits package included health insurance, retirement contributions, and most appealingly, tuition assistance for continuing education. Mrs. Thompson explained that many museum employees use this benefit to pursue additional training or advanced degrees while gaining professional experience. My family's reaction to the job news was mixed but predictably lukewarm. They were relieved that I'd found stable employment with a respected institution, but the nature of the work confirmed their long-standing concerns about my career trajectory. During the family dinner where I announced my new position, the conversation revealed the complex dynamics of support, disappointment, and barely concealed concern that had surrounded my post-graduation job search. Museum security sounds interesting, my mother said, using the careful tone she'd perfected for discussing my career choices. The Metropolitan Museum is a prestigious place to work. I'm sure you'll learn a lot there. My father was more direct but tried to remain encouraging. It's good that you found something with benefits and stability. Sometimes you have to start somewhere and work your way up. Maybe this will lead to better opportunities down the road. Jessica, who was visiting for the weekend between business trips, approached the news with her characteristic blend of supportive sister and successful professional. Museum work could actually be really good networking, she suggested. You'll meet people from all kinds of backgrounds, including wealthy donors and community leaders. Building those relationships could open doors you haven't even considered yet. Alex, now fully absorbed in his rapidly expanding startup, offered technological perspective. Museums are actually becoming really high-tech with digital security systems and data analytics. You might get exposure to some cutting-edge surveillance technology that could be valuable experience for federal agencies. Their attempts at optimism were well-intentioned but highlighted the fundamental disconnect between my actual interests and their understanding of what constituted valuable career development. They were trying to find ways that museum security could serve as a stepping stone to something they considered more worthy of my education and abilities, rather than recognizing it as meaningful work in its own right. The first few weeks on the job confirmed both the routine nature of the work and its unexpected complexity. My daily responsibilities included monitoring galleries during public hours, conducting security sweeps after closing, and maintaining detailed logs of incidents, visitor numbers, and any unusual observations. The work required constant attention and physical stamina, as I spent most of my shift walking through the museum's extensive galleries and corridors. But beneath the apparent simplicity of the role, I discovered layers of complexity that hadn't been obvious during the hiring process. The Metropolitan Museum housed one of the world's most valuable collections of art and artifacts, representing billions of dollars in irreplaceable cultural heritage. Protecting these treasures required understanding not just basic security protocols, but also the specific vulnerabilities and requirements of different types of objects, the behavioral patterns of various visitor demographics, and the complex relationships between public access and preservation needs. My training period lasted 6 weeks and covered far more ground than I'd anticipated. Beyond basic security procedures, I learned about art history, conservation techniques, emergency response protocols, and the intricate coordination required between museum staff, law enforcement agencies, and specialized security firms. The training program revealed that museum security operated at the intersection of cultural education, law enforcement, and historical preservation, requiring skills and knowledge that went far beyond simple crowd control. Mrs. Chen, the head of security operations, conducted much of my advanced training personally. She was a former police detective who'd transitioned to museum work after 20 years in law enforcement, bringing a level of professionalism and expertise that elevated the entire security department. During our training sessions, she emphasized that effective museum security required understanding people, not just monitoring them. Anyone can watch visitors and check bags, she explained during a particularly intensive session on behavioral observation. But preventing problems requires understanding what normal behavior looks like so you can recognize when something is off. You need to read body language, notice inconsistencies in stories, and develop instincts about when someone's interest in particular objects crosses the line from appreciation to acquisition planning. This approach to security work aligned perfectly with my natural observational tendencies and academic background in criminal psychology. For the first time since graduation, I felt like my education was directly relevant to my daily responsibilities. The behavioral analysis techniques I'd studied in university courses proved invaluable for assessing visitor intentions and identifying potential security risks before they materialized into actual problems. My performance during the training period impressed my supervisors and colleagues. I consistently scored highest on the written assessments, demonstrated exceptional attention to detail during practical exercises, and showed an intuitive grasp of crowd dynamics that usually took much longer to develop. Mrs. Chen noted in my training evaluation that I possessed exceptional observational skills and analytical thinking that suggest significant potential for advancement within museum security operations. But despite this professional recognition, family conversations about my work remained tinged with the assumption that museum security was a temporary stop rather than a legitimate career path. During family gatherings, relatives would ask about my job with polite interest that quickly shifted to questions about my real plans for the future. The underlying message was that protecting art and artifacts was nice work for someone without better options, but not something that intelligent, educated people pursued as long-term careers. This attitude became particularly apparent during Jessica's wedding planning, which dominated family conversations throughout my first year at the museum. As the maid of honor, I was involved in numerous family events where my job became a frequent topic of casual conversation among relatives and family friends. While people were always polite about my work, their responses revealed assumptions about both the nature of museum security and my long-term prospects. Museum security must be fascinating, distant relatives would say, using the tone reserved for discussing interesting but impractical hobbies. Do you get to learn about all those famous paintings? That must be like getting paid to visit an art gallery every day. These comments, while well-intentioned, reduced my professional responsibilities to tourist activities and suggested that my work was more about personal enrichment than serious career development. When I tried to explain the complexity of modern museum security operations, the sophisticated training required, or the important role museums played in preserving cultural heritage, people would nod politely but clearly considered these details less significant than the broader question of when I planned to move on to something more substantial. The most difficult conversations occurred with family friends who worked in business, law, or other traditionally prestigious fields. They would offer networking opportunities, suggest I consider returning to school for an MBA or law degree, or recommend that I look into corporate security positions that offered better advancement potential. While these suggestions came from genuine concern for my future, they reinforced the perception that my current work was essentially a placeholder while I figured out what I really wanted to do with my life. My attempts to explain that I was gaining valuable experience and developing specialized skills often fell flat because the security industry remained largely invisible to people outside it. Most civilians had no idea about the sophisticated technology, extensive training, and complex coordination required to protect high-value cultural institutions. They saw uniformed guards walking through galleries and assumed the work was simple and unstimulating, requiring little more than basic alertness and the ability to follow simple procedures. This misunderstanding extended even to my immediate family, who remained supportive but clearly hoped my museum position would lead to something they considered more appropriate for my education and abilities. During family dinners, they would share news about former classmates who'd found positions in their intended fields, landed promotions at major companies, or begun graduate programs that promised better career prospects. Remember Tom Rodriguez from your high school class? My mother would mention casually. His mother told me he just got promoted to supervisor at that engineering firm downtown. Such a smart boy, and now he's really making something of himself. These updates weren't meant as criticism, but they highlighted the ongoing family concern that I was underutilizing my potential in a field that offered limited opportunities for the kind of success they wanted for me. The implication was that while museum work was acceptable as temporary employment, it wasn't a foundation for building the kind of career that would provide long-term security and social recognition. The pressure intensified during my second year at the museum when both Jessica and Alex achieved new levels of success that made family gatherings feel like celebrations of their accomplishments while my own professional development seemed stagnant by comparison. Jessica had been promoted to senior associate at her investment firm, putting her on track for vice president before age 30. Alex's startup had secured a second round of funding that valued the company at over $20 million, making him wealthy on paper while still in his early 20s. Meanwhile, I'd received positive performance reviews and small pay increases that kept pace with cost of living, but my job responsibilities remained essentially unchanged from my first day. From the outside, it appeared that I was stuck in an entry-level position while my siblings continued climbing toward increasingly impressive achievements. This perception wasn't entirely unfair. Museum security, like many specialized fields, offered limited advancement opportunities unless employees pursued additional education or transferred to different types of institutions. The career ladder was narrow, with most advancement requiring supervisory responsibilities that might take years to become available. For someone with my educational background and intellectual capabilities, remaining in the same role indefinitely did represent a form of underemployment that my family was right to question. But what none of them understood was that my work had already begun evolving in ways that weren't reflected in my official job title or public responsibilities. Mrs. Chen had started involving me in specialized training programs that went far beyond basic gallery security. I was learning about international art trafficking, insurance investigation techniques, and coordination protocols with federal agencies that investigated cultural heritage crimes. These additional responsibilities remained largely invisible to anyone outside the museum's security department, but they were transforming my role from simple gallery monitoring to something much more complex and significant. The training programs were voluntary and didn't come with immediate pay increases or title changes, but they were preparing me for opportunities that would eventually dwarf anything my family currently understood about museum operations. The criminal justice program at State University had provided me with a solid theoretical foundation, but it was my time at the Metropolitan Museum that truly shaped my understanding of how law enforcement actually functioned in specialized contexts. The gap between classroom learning and practical application became apparent almost immediately, as the realities of daily security work revealed complexities that textbooks couldn't adequately capture. During my first few months on the job, I discovered that effective museum security required a unique blend of skills that drew from psychology, art history, technology, and traditional law enforcement. Unlike police work, which dealt primarily with active crimes and emergency responses, museum security focused on prevention, observation, and the protection of irreplaceable objects that couldn't be replaced if damaged or stolen. The visitor dynamics alone presented challenges that required constant adaptation and learning. The Metropolitan Museum attracted millions of visitors annually from every continent, representing countless different cultural backgrounds, languages, and behavioral norms. What seemed suspicious in one context might be perfectly normal in another. A person photographing artwork extensively might be a serious art student, a potential thief documenting security arrangements, or simply an enthusiastic tourist with no awareness of museum photography policies. Learning to distinguish between these possibilities required developing what Mrs. Chen called contextual awareness, the ability to read situations holistically rather than focusing on isolated behaviors. This skill proved directly related to the criminal psychology courses I'd taken in university, but applying academic theory to real-world situations revealed how much practical experience was needed to make accurate assessments. My academic background did provide certain advantages that my colleagues without formal education in criminal justice lacked. I understood the legal frameworks governing search and seizure, the evidentiary requirements for different types of investigations, and the psychological principles underlying various forms of criminal behavior. This knowledge proved valuable when incidents occurred that required coordination with outside law enforcement agencies. But the specialized nature of museum security also required learning entirely new bodies of knowledge that hadn't been covered in my university coursework. Art history became essential for understanding the significance and vulnerability of different pieces in the collection. Conservation science helped me recognize when environmental conditions might threaten artifacts. Insurance protocols shaped how incidents were documented and reported to minimize liability while preserving evidence. The technology component of modern museum security was particularly eye-opening. The stereotype of security guards with simple radios and flashlights bore no resemblance to the sophisticated systems actually used to protect major cultural institutions. The Metropolitan Museum employed thermal imaging cameras, motion sensors, pressure-sensitive floor panels, and computer systems that tracked visitor movement patterns throughout the building. Learning to operate and monitor these systems required technical training that hadn't been part of my criminal justice education. The security department sent me to specialized courses on electronic surveillance, alarm system management, and digital evidence preservation. These skills were increasingly valuable in law enforcement generally, as traditional police work became more dependent on technology and data analysis. My performance in these technical training programs impressed my supervisors and led to additional responsibilities that gradually expanded my role beyond basic gallery monitoring. Mrs. Chen began assigning me to special events that required more sophisticated security planning, such as exhibition openings, VIP tours, and educational programs that brought large groups of school children through the galleries. These assignments provided exposure to the administrative and coordination aspects of museum operations that most security staff never experienced. I learned how exhibition installations were planned and executed, how loan agreements between institutions were structured, and how insurance requirements influenced everything from artwork placement to visitor flow patterns. More significantly, I began working with external law enforcement agencies on cases that intersected with museum operations. Art theft and fraud investigations often required input from museum professionals who understood the legitimate art market, authentication processes, and the documentation that accompanied legally acquired pieces. My first involvement in such a case occurred during my second year at the museum, when FBI agents investigating a stolen painting ring requested assistance. in identifying forgeries that were being sold through reputable auction houses. The case required analyzing provenance documentation, comparing physical characteristics of questioned pieces with known authentic works, and providing expert testimony about normal practices in the art acquisition world. The FBI agents leading the investigation were impressed by my ability to quickly understand the criminal aspects of the case while also providing the specialized cultural knowledge they lacked. Agent Martinez, the lead investigator, mentioned that they rarely encountered security personnel who could bridge the gap between law enforcement methodology and art world expertise. Most cops don't understand art, and most art people don't understand criminal investigation, he told me after a particularly productive collaboration session. You seem to speak both languages, which makes you incredibly valuable for these types of cases. This feedback was the first indication that my unusual career path might actually represent an advantage rather than a compromise. While my family continued to view museum security as a temporary detour from more traditional law enforcement careers, I was discovering that the specialized knowledge I was developing could open doors that conventional police experience couldn't access. The art fraud case also provided my first exposure to federal investigation techniques that went far beyond anything I'd studied in university. The FBI's approach to complex financial crimes involved sophisticated analysis of bank records, communication intercepts, and international coordination that revealed how much I still needed to learn about modern law enforcement operations. Agent Martinez encouraged me to consider applying for federal positions once I'd gained more experience, but he also warned about the highly competitive nature of FBI recruitment and the lengthy background investigation process required for security clearances. Many qualified candidates waited years for opportunities, and there was no guarantee that any particular application would result in an offer. This reality check reinforced my decision to continue developing specialized expertise at the museum while building the kind of experience record that might eventually make me a more competitive federal candidate. The museum environment provided opportunities to work on cases involving international art trafficking, money laundering through cultural objects, and insurance fraud schemes that gave me exposure to the types of complex investigations that federal agencies handled. My involvement in these cases remained secondary to my primary security responsibilities, but it was gradually changing how I understood my role and career trajectory. Rather than viewing museum work as a stepping stone to traditional law enforcement, I began to see it as a specialized field that combined elements of investigation, cultural preservation, and international cooperation in ways that were uniquely challenging and meaningful. This shift in perspective didn't immediately resolve the family concerns about my career choices, but it did give me more confidence in defending those choices when relatives raised questions about my long-term plans. I could now describe specific cases I'd worked on, specialized training I'd received, and professional relationships I was building with federal agents and international law enforcement officials. But translating this professional development into language that my family could understand and value remained challenging. The work I was most excited about was also the most difficult to discuss openly, as many of the cases involved ongoing investigations or sensitive information that couldn't be shared outside professional contexts. During family gatherings, I found myself giving increasingly vague responses to questions about my daily responsibilities, not because I was ashamed of the work but because I couldn't provide the specific examples that would have demonstrated its complexity and significance. This lack of concrete details to share unfortunately reinforced the family perception that my job was routine and unstimulating. The situation became more complicated when my security clearance investigation began during my third year at the museum. The background check process required extensive interviews with family members, friends, and professional references, all of whom were asked detailed questions about my character, judgment, and potential vulnerabilities to foreign influence or criminal pressure. While my family was cooperative during these interviews, the process highlighted how little they actually understood about my work and career aspirations. When investigators asked about my professional goals and motivations, my parents could only provide general statements about my interest in law enforcement and my dedication to my current position. The investigators' questions also revealed how much they didn't know about my daily activities and responsibilities. My family assumed I spent most of my time walking through galleries and monitoring visitors, but they had no awareness of the training programs I was attending, the specialized cases I was contributing to, or the professional relationships I was developing with federal agents and international law enforcement officials. This disconnect between my actual professional development and my family's understanding of it became a source of growing frustration as my work became more interesting and significant while appearing increasingly stagnant from the outside. The most meaningful aspects of my job were also the least visible. creating a situation where my professional growth was essentially invisible to the people whose opinions mattered most to me personally. The security clearance process itself took nearly 18 months to complete, during which time I continued developing my expertise and building relationships that would prove crucial to my eventual career breakthrough. But from my family's perspective, this period represented nearly 2 years of apparent career stagnation, as my job title, salary, and visible responsibilities remained essentially unchanged. The call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning in October, just as I was finishing my usual pre-shift preparation routine. Mrs. Chen's voice over the phone carried an unusual tension that immediately caught my attention, though her words seemed routine enough on the surface. "Sarah, I need you to come in 2 hours early today for a special briefing," she said, her typically measured tone containing an undercurrent of urgency that I'd never heard before. "We have a new security protocol to discuss, and it requires immediate implementation." The request wasn't entirely unusual. The museum occasionally updated security procedures in response to specific threats, new intelligence about potential risks, or changes in federal guidelines for protecting cultural institutions. But something about Mrs. Chen's carefully chosen words suggested this briefing would be different from the routine policy updates we typically received. I arrived at the museum's staff entrance 90 minutes early, using the extra time to review incident reports and familiarize myself with any special exhibitions or events that might require enhanced security attention. The building felt different. During the quiet hours before public opening, when only essential staff were present and the galleries held the peaceful atmosphere that made the artifacts seem even more precious and significant. Mrs. Chen was waiting in her office along with someone I didn't recognize, a woman in her early 50s wearing a conservative business suit that suggested government employment or corporate consulting. The stranger had the alertly observant demeanor that I'd learned to associate with law enforcement professionals, though her appearance was too polished for typical police work. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet Dr. Elena Vasquez," Mrs. Chen said, gesturing toward the visitor with a formality that immediately signaled this was not a routine introduction. Dr. Vasquez is the Deputy Director of Cultural Heritage Protection for a federal task force that works closely with museums and other cultural institutions. Dr. Vasquez stood and extended her hand with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command authority. Her handshake was firm, her eye contact direct, and her smile professional but genuine. "Ms. Martinez, I've been reviewing your personnel file and performance evaluations. Quite impressive work, especially your contributions to the art fraud investigation last year." The mention of the FBI case surprised me, as that investigation had been concluded months earlier and I'd assumed my involvement was a minor footnote in a much larger operation. But Dr. Vasquez's reference suggested that my role had been noticed and evaluated by people far beyond the museum's security department. That case demonstrated exactly the kind of analytical thinking and cultural expertise that our task force values, Dr. Vasquez continued, settling back into her chair with the relaxed confidence of someone delivering news they expected to be well received. "Which brings me to why I'm here today." Mrs. Chen leaned forward slightly, her expression revealing nothing about what was coming next. "Sarah, Dr. Vasquez has a proposition that could significantly change your career trajectory, but it would also require you to maintain absolute discretion about certain aspects of your work here." The word discretion triggered immediate attention, as my training had taught me to recognize when conversations were moving into classified territory. Dr. Vasquez seemed to notice my shift in focus and nodded approvingly before continuing. "The task force I represent operates under the joint authority of several federal agencies, including the FBI, CIA, and State Department," she explained, her voice taking on the careful tone used for conveying sensitive information. "Our mission involves protecting American cultural heritage from international threats, investigating art trafficking networks that fund criminal and terrorist organizations, and coordinating with foreign governments on cultural repatriation efforts." This description immediately captured my imagination, as it represented exactly the kind of complex, meaningful work that I'd hoped to find in federal law enforcement. But Dr. Vasquez's next words revealed that the opportunity was more significant and unusual than I could have anticipated. "What makes our task force unique is that we operate primarily through established cultural institutions rather than traditional government offices," she continued. "Museum professionals provide perfect cover for intelligence gathering, international coordination, and the specialized knowledge required to understand cultural trafficking networks." The implication was becoming clear, but I waited for explicit confirmation before allowing myself to believe what seemed to be happening. "We're offering you a position as a cultural intelligence analyst, with your official cover being continued employment in museum security," Dr. Vasquez said, watching my face carefully for any sign of hesitation or concern. The weight of Dr. Vasquez's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket, transforming what I had thought was a routine briefing into something that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of my entire life. Her offer represented everything I had dreamed of during my criminal justice studies, but delivered in a package so unexpected that I struggled to process the full implications. Your salary would be substantially higher than your current museum compensation, Dr. Vasquez continued, consulting a folder that contained what appeared to be detailed financial projections. The position includes comprehensive benefits, advanced training opportunities, and the potential for rapid advancement based on performance. More importantly, you would be contributing to national security operations that protect both American cultural heritage and international stability. Mrs. Chen observed my reaction with the careful attention of someone who had clearly been through this conversation before, though her expression revealed nothing about her own role in whatever organization Dr. Vasquez represented. The realization that my supervisor might have been operating undercover for years added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. I understand this is a significant decision that requires careful consideration, Dr. Vasquez acknowledged, though her tone suggested that she expected my answer to be positive. The position would require you to maintain your current public role while gradually taking on additional responsibilities that couldn't be discussed with family, friends, or colleagues outside the cleared community. The mention of maintaining secrecy from my family immediately triggered concerns about how such an arrangement would affect the relationships that were already strained by their misunderstanding of my career choices. If I accepted this position, I would be unable to explain to my parents, Jessica, or Alex why my dead-end job was actually meaningful and important. From their perspective, I would continue to appear stuck in an entry-level security position while they advanced in their respective careers. What kind of additional responsibilities are we talking about? I asked, trying to focus on practical details while my mind raced through the broader implications of what was being offered. Dr. Vasquez opened another section of her folder and began describing a world of international operations that bore no resemblance to anything I had imagined. When I first applied for museum security work, cultural intelligence analysts track international art trafficking networks, monitor auction houses and private collections for evidence of illegal sales, and coordinate with foreign law enforcement agencies on repatriation efforts. The work requires travel, advanced technical training, and the ability to operate effectively in high-stakes diplomatic environments. The scope of these responsibilities was both thrilling and intimidating. My experience with the art fraud investigation had provided a glimpse into federal law enforcement operations, but Dr. Vasquez was describing work that operated at the intersection of intelligence gathering, international diplomacy, and criminal investigation in ways that seemed almost too ambitious to be real. The training program begins immediately and continues for approximately 18 months, she continued, outlining a schedule that would require significant time commitments beyond my regular museum duties. Initial phases focus on intelligence analysis techniques, cultural artifact authentication, and international law. Advanced training includes fieldwork, surveillance techniques, and coordination protocols with foreign intelligence services. Mrs. Chen finally spoke, her voice carrying a warmth that suggested genuine concern for my welfare rather than simple professional obligation. Sarah, I want you to understand that accepting this position would fundamentally change your life in ways that go beyond career advancement. The work is meaningful and important, but it also requires sacrifices that not everyone is prepared to make. Her warning highlighted the personal costs that I hadn't fully considered during the excitement of hearing about the professional opportunities. Maintaining cover would mean living a double life that could strain relationships and limit my ability to share significant aspects of my experience with the people who mattered most to me. Can I ask how long you've been involved in this kind of work? I directed the question to Mrs. Chen, realizing that understanding her experience might help me evaluate what Dr. Vasquez was offering. 15 years, she replied without hesitation. I transitioned from traditional police work to cultural intelligence during the early stages of the task force development. It's been the most rewarding career experience I could have imagined, but it's also required maintaining relationships and making personal choices that weren't always easy. Her honesty about the challenges involved was reassuring, as it suggested that the organization valued realistic expectations over unrealistic promises. But her obvious satisfaction with the career path she had chosen was equally compelling, especially coming from someone whose professional judgment I had learned to respect completely. Dr. Vasquez consulted her watch and began gathering her materials with the efficient movements of someone operating on a tight schedule. I don't need an immediate answer, but the training cycle begins in 2 weeks, so a decision within the next few days would be necessary. The compressed timeline added pressure to an already overwhelming decision, but it also suggested that the opportunity was genuine and urgent rather than a routine recruitment effort that could be delayed indefinitely. If I were to accept, what would happen to my current position here? I asked, suddenly concerned about the colleagues and responsibilities I would be leaving behind. Your official role would remain unchanged, Mrs. Chen explained. From the perspective of other museum staff and the general public, you would continue as a senior security officer with gradually expanding responsibilities for special exhibitions and VIP events. The cover provides perfect justification for irregular schedules, travel requirements, and access to restricted areas. The elegance of this arrangement was immediately apparent. My family's existing assumptions about my career would continue to seem accurate from the outside, while the reality of my work would be transformed in ways that they could never suspect. The irony was that accepting this position would finally give me the meaningful federal law enforcement career that they wanted for me, but I would be unable to tell them about it. What about background investigations and security clearances? I asked, remembering the lengthy process I had already undergone for my current position. Your existing clearance provides the foundation, but this position requires additional levels of authorization that involve more extensive investigation, Dr. Vasquez explained. The process typically takes 6 to 8 months, during which you would begin preliminary training while the clearance upgrade is completed. The mention of even higher security clearances reinforced the significance of what was being offered while also highlighting the additional layers of secrecy that would be required. Each level of classification would create more barriers between my professional life and my personal relationships, making it increasingly difficult to maintain authentic connections with family and friends. I have one more question that might seem trivial, but it's important to me, I said, feeling slightly embarrassed about raising personal concerns in such a professional context. My family already thinks I'm wasting my education and abilities in this job. If I can't tell them about what I'm really doing, how do I handle their continued disappointment and pressure to find something better? Dr. Vasquez's expression softened slightly, suggesting that this concern was both reasonable and familiar. That's actually one of the most common challenges for people in covered positions. We provide guidance and support for managing family relationships, but ultimately each person has to find their own way of dealing with the disconnect between public perception and private reality. Mrs. Chen added her perspective with the insight of someone who had navigated these challenges personally. In my experience, the work itself becomes so meaningful that the family pressure becomes less significant over time. When you're contributing to operations that protect national security and cultural heritage, the opinions of people who don't understand what you're doing matter less than they used to. Her comment resonated with my own growing frustration about my family's persistent misunderstanding of my career choices. If anything, their lack of appreciation for my current work had already begun to create emotional distance that might make maintaining secrecy easier rather than more difficult. One final consideration, Dr. Vasquez said, standing to indicate that the meeting was concluding. This opportunity exists because our assessments indicate that you have both the analytical capabilities and the cultural knowledge necessary for this type of work. Positions at this level aren't offered frequently, and the specialized nature of the training means that declining this opportunity would likely mean it wouldn't be available again in the future. The implication was clear: this was a now or never decision that would determine whether I continued in traditional museum security or moved into the kind of federal law enforcement career that I had always wanted. The choice was between the known limitations of my current situation and the unknown possibilities of work that could fulfill my professional aspirations while also serving important national interests. After Dr. Vasquez left, Mrs. Chen and I sat in comfortable silence while I processed the magnitude of what had just been offered. The opportunity was everything I had hoped for during my years of frustrated job searching, but it came with complications that I hadn't anticipated and requirements that would fundamentally change how I related to the people closest to me. Can I ask you something personal? I finally said, breaking the silence that had stretched between us. Of course. Do you ever regret the secrecy? The inability to share what you're really doing with people who care about you? Mrs. Chen considered the question carefully before responding. There are moments when it's difficult, especially when family members express concern about your career or suggest that you're not living up to your potential. But there are also moments when you prevent something terrible from happening, when you recover stolen artifacts that represent irreplaceable pieces of human history, when you contribute to operations that make the world safer and more stable. Those moments make the personal costs worthwhile. Her answer didn't eliminate my concerns about the family implications, but it did help me understand that the decision ultimately came down to what kind of work would provide the most meaning and satisfaction over the long term. My current situation was becoming increasingly frustrating precisely because I knew I was capable of more challenging and important work, even if I couldn't articulate exactly what that work might involve. The thought of continuing in basic museum security for years while Jessica and Alex achieved increasingly impressive career milestones was becoming unbearable. At least this opportunity would give me work that matched my capabilities and interests, even if I couldn't share the details with anyone outside the cleared community. How long did it take you to decide when you were offered a similar position? I asked. About 30 seconds, Mrs. Chen replied with a slight smile. But I was in a very different situation. I was burned out from police work and looking for something that would re-energize my career. You're younger and have more options, so your decision should probably be more deliberate than mine was. Her comment reminded me that I was at a crucial point in my professional development where the choices I made would shape the entire trajectory of my career. Accepting this position would commit me to a path that could lead to extraordinary opportunities, but would also require sacrifices that I might not fully understand until years later. The rest of that day passed in a blur of routine security duties that seemed almost surreal given the morning's revelations. Walking through the galleries, monitoring visitors, and completing incident reports felt like playing a role in a movie, rather than performing my actual job. The familiar responsibilities remained the same, but my understanding of their context and significance had been completely transformed. Every interaction with colleagues made me aware of the secret world that operated parallel to the museum's public functions. Mrs. Chen continued her normal supervisory activities, but I now knew that her real responsibilities extended far beyond anything visible to the museum's other employees. The realization that such operations could be conducted invisibly within familiar institutions was both impressive and slightly unsettling. That evening, I sat in my apartment trying to imagine how my life would change if I accepted Dr. Vasquez's offer. The practical benefits were obvious: better salary, more challenging work, opportunities for advancement, and the satisfaction of contributing to important national security operations. But the personal costs were harder to calculate, involving relationships and lifestyle changes that might not become apparent until the commitment was already irreversible. The most difficult aspect of the decision was the certainty that accepting would mean disappointing my family in new ways while being unable to explain why their disappointment was unfounded. From their perspective, I would continue to appear stuck in an entry-level position while they advanced in careers that provided increasing recognition and financial success. But the alternative was to remain in work that no longer challenged me while pursuing traditional federal law enforcement opportunities that might never materialize. After months of frustrating applications and rejections, Dr. Vasquez's offer represented exactly the kind of breakthrough that I had hoped for but hadn't known how to achieve. The decision ultimately came down to whether I was willing to prioritize professional fulfillment over family approval, meaningful work over conventional recognition, and personal growth over comfortable predictability. When I framed the choice in those terms, the answer became clear even if the implications remained uncertain. 3 days later, I called Dr. Vasquez to accept her offer, officially beginning a journey that would transform not only my career but my entire understanding of how intelligence operations functioned in the modern world. The conversation was brief and professional, but it marked the end of my frustration with conventional career paths and the beginning of work that would eventually vindicate every choice I had made since graduating from college. The irony that my family would initially see this decision as confirmation of my limited ambitions rather than recognition of my exceptional capabilities would make the eventual revelation even more dramatic. But that realization lay months in the future, hidden behind layers of training, clearance investigations, and operational experience that would gradually transform me from a museum security guard into a federal intelligence director capable of coordinating international operations involving billions of dollars and national security implications. For now, I was simply someone who had chosen meaningful work over family approval, trusting that the truth would eventually speak for itself in ways that no amount of explanation could achieve. The decision felt right in ways that I couldn't fully articulate, suggesting that I was finally moving toward the kind of career that would justify every sacrifice required to achieve it. The training facility where my real education began bore no resemblance to any government building I had ever imagined. Located in what appeared to be a nondescript office complex in suburban Virginia, the Cultural Heritage Intelligence Center operated behind the facade of an import-export consulting firm that provided perfect cover for the international communications and travel that characterized our operations. Dr. Vasquez led me through multiple security checkpoints that revealed the true nature of the facility step by step. Each level required different clearances and provided access to increasingly sophisticated equipment and classified information. By the time we reached the main operations floor, I understood that I was entering a world that operated according to rules and priorities that most people never suspected existed. The operations center resembled something from a science fiction movie, with dozens of analysts working at computer stations that displayed real-time intelligence from sources around the globe. Wall-mounted screens showed world maps with moving indicators that tracked the locations of stolen artifacts, the activities of known trafficking networks, and ongoing operations in countries I had only read about in news reports. "This is where you'll be working once your training is complete," Dr. Vasquez explained, gesturing toward a section of workstations that focused specifically on European art trafficking operations. Every major art theft, every significant auction house transaction, every suspicious private collection transfer gets analyzed here before the information is distributed to field agents and foreign law enforcement partners. The scope of the operation was staggering. Computer screens displayed surveillance footage from auction houses in London, communications intercepts from suspected traffickers in Eastern Europe, and satellite imagery of shipping facilities in South America where stolen artifacts were believed to be stored before transport to black market buyers. My training officer, Dr. James Wellington, had spent 20 years in various intelligence agencies before specializing in cultural heritage protection. His approach to education combined traditional academic instruction with hands-on analysis of active cases that provided immediate context for the theoretical concepts we studied. "Cultural trafficking isn't just about stealing pretty paintings," he explained during my first week of intensive training. "These networks move billions of dollars annually and often serve as funding mechanisms for organized crime syndicates, terrorist organizations, and corrupt government officials. When you track a stolen Picasso, you're often following money that will eventually pay for weapons, drugs, or human trafficking operations." This connection between art theft and broader criminal enterprises transformed my understanding of why cultural heritage protection warranted such sophisticated intelligence resources. What had seemed like a specialized field concerned primarily with preserving historical artifacts was actually a critical component of international security operations that affected global stability in ways that most museum visitors never considered. The technical training covered surveillance techniques, communication intercepts, financial analysis, and digital forensics that went far beyond anything I had learned during my criminal justice education. Modern art trafficking relied heavily on encrypted communications, cryptocurrency transactions, and sophisticated logistics networks that required equally advanced investigative techniques to penetrate and understand. My background in museum security provided advantages that many other trainees lacked. I understood how legitimate art markets functioned, could recognize authentication techniques used by reputable institutions, and had developed the observational skills necessary to identify subtle inconsistencies that might indicate fraudulent documentation or suspicious provenance claims. But the international scope of the work required learning about legal systems, cultural practices, and diplomatic protocols in dozens of countries where trafficking networks operated. Each nation had different laws governing cultural heritage, varying levels of cooperation with international law enforcement, and unique political considerations that affected how operations could be conducted. The most fascinating aspect of the training involved studying actual trafficking networks that had been successfully penetrated and dismantled by previous operations. Case studies revealed the incredible sophistication of modern criminal organizations that could steal artifacts from museums in one country, transport them through multiple intermediate locations, and deliver them to private collectors on different continents within weeks of the original theft. One case study that particularly captured my attention involved a network that had operated for over a decade by establishing legitimate art restoration businesses in major European cities. These businesses provided perfect cover for receiving stolen pieces, altering their appearance to avoid detection, and creating false documentation that allowed them to be sold through reputable auction houses to unsuspecting buyers. The investigation that ultimately exposed this network required coordination between intelligence agencies in 7 countries, surveillance operations lasting more than 2 years, and the development of undercover identities that allowed agents to infiltrate the criminal organization at multiple levels. The final arrests resulted in the recovery of over 300 stolen artworks valued at more than $500 million. This is the kind of operation you'll eventually be qualified to plan and coordinate, Dr. Wellington told me as we reviewed the case files. But it requires understanding not just the criminal aspects, but also the cultural significance of what's being stolen, the legitimate market forces that affect pricing and demand, and the diplomatic relationships that determine how evidence can be gathered and shared across international boundaries. The training program lasted 14 months and concluded with a practical exercise that tested every skill I had developed during the intensive instruction period. Working with a team of experienced analysts, I was assigned to investigate suspicious activity surrounding a major auction scheduled to take place in Switzerland, where several pieces were being offered that had questionable provenance documentation. The exercise required monitoring communications between suspected traffickers, analyzing financial records that might reveal the true ownership of the pieces being sold, and coordinating with Swiss law enforcement officials to gather evidence that could be used in potential criminal prosecutions. The simulated operation felt completely realistic and provided confidence that I was ready to handle actual cases with real consequences. My performance during the final exercise exceeded expectations and resulted in assignment to the European Trafficking Analysis Division, where I would be responsible for monitoring organized crime networks operating primarily in Italy, France, and Spain. These countries were major sources of stolen artifacts due to their rich cultural heritage, but they were also important transit points for pieces stolen from other regions and destined for private collectors throughout the world. The reality of maintaining a double life became apparent almost immediately after I began my operational assignments. My official schedule at the Metropolitan Museum remained largely unchanged, but my actual responsibilities now included evening briefings, weekend surveillance operations, and international travel that had to be carefully disguised as vacation time or professional development activities. The cover story required constant attention to detail and coordination with Mrs. Chen, who helped create plausible explanations for my irregular schedule and occasional absences. From the perspective of other museum employees, I was simply someone who had developed expertise in special exhibitions and VIP security arrangements that occasionally required unusual working hours. But maintaining this facade with my family proved more challenging than I had anticipated. Their existing skepticism about my career choices meant that they scrutinized any changes in my routine or lifestyle for evidence that I was finally taking steps to find more suitable employment. Paradoxically, the career advancement I had actually achieved had to be hidden while they continued to worry about my apparent lack of professional progress. The first major operation I participated in involved tracking a network that was smuggling ancient Roman artifacts from archaeological sites in southern Italy to private collectors in the United States. The investigation required 3 weeks of surveillance in Naples, where I posed as a graduate student researching museum conservation techniques while actually documenting the activities of suspected traffickers who operated through legitimate antiquities dealers. Explaining this absence to my family required an elaborate story about attending a professional development conference that the museum was sponsoring to enhance my qualifications for potential supervisory positions. The lie was plausible enough to satisfy their questions, but it felt uncomfortable to deceive people who were genuinely concerned about my future and wanted to support my career advancement. The irony was that I was finally doing exactly the kind of meaningful work that they had always wanted for me, but the classified nature of the operations meant that I had to pretend my professional life remained as mundane and limited as they had always feared it was. Their continued expressions of concern and suggestions for alternative career paths became increasingly difficult to handle gracefully. Jessica was particularly persistent in her efforts to help me find what she considered more appropriate employment. During family dinners, she would mention networking opportunities at her investment firm, suggest that I consider business school, or offer to introduce me to contacts in corporate security who might have openings for someone with my background. "Sarah, you're too smart to be stuck in that job forever," she would say with the well-intentioned persistence that made her successful in business negotiations. "I know people in risk management and compliance who would love to hire someone with your attention to detail and security experience. The money would be so much better, and you'd have real advancement opportunities." These conversations became exercises in creative deflection, as I had to appear appreciative of her concern while avoiding commitments that would conflict with my actual responsibilities. The cover story that I was gradually developing expertise in museum operations provided some protection, but it also reinforced their perception that I was pursuing a limited career path that wouldn't lead to the kind of success they valued. Alex approached my situation from a different angle, focusing on the technology aspects of modern security systems and suggesting that I develop programming skills that could make me more valuable in corporate environments. His startup was growing rapidly, and he was always looking for talented people who could contribute to various projects while building their own technical capabilities. "The future of security is all about data analysis and predictive algorithms," he would explain with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed technology could solve any problem. "You could learn these skills part-time and position yourself for much better opportunities. I'd be happy to mentor you through some online courses that would give you marketable technical capabilities." His offers were generous and reflected genuine desire to help me advance professionally, but accepting would have required time and energy that I was already dedicating to classified training programs and operational assignments. The need to decline these opportunities without explaining why became another source of stress in family relationships that were already strained by their misunderstanding of my career trajectory. The most difficult conversations occurred with my parents, whose concern about my future had deepened as Jessica and Alex achieved increasingly impressive milestones while my situation appeared to remain static. They had sacrificed to provide educational opportunities for all their children, and my apparent failure to capitalize on those investments troubled them in ways that went beyond simple career concerns. "We just want to see you happy and successful," my mother would say during our private conversations, her voice carrying the weight of years of worry about my choices. "Your brother and sister are building something meaningful with their lives. We want the same thing for you, but it seems like you're not taking advantage of your potential." These conversations were heartbreaking because they revealed how much my parents cared about my welfare while also demonstrating how completely they misunderstood what I was actually accomplishing. The work I was doing was more meaningful and important than anything Jessica or Alex had achieved, but I couldn't share that information without violating security protocols that could end my career and potentially compromise ongoing operations. The isolation created by maintaining operational security extended beyond family relationships to affect my social life in ways that I hadn't anticipated. Dating became virtually impossible when I couldn't discuss my actual work, travel frequently on unexplained business, and had to maintain careful boundaries about personal information that might compromise my cover identity. Friends from college and former colleagues gradually drifted away as I became less available for social activities and less forthcoming about my professional and personal life. The classified nature of my work meant that I couldn't share the excitement and satisfaction that came from successful operations, the intellectual challenges of complex investigations, or the sense of purpose that motivated my daily efforts. The financial benefits of my new position were substantial but had to be hidden to maintain the appearance that I was still earning a modest museum salary. I continued living in the same apartment, driving the same car, and maintaining the same lifestyle that my family associated with limited career prospects. The increased income was saved rather than spent, creating a growing financial cushion that I couldn't acknowledge without raising questions about its source. This enforced frugality was particularly difficult during family gatherings where Jessica and Alex would casually mention expensive purchases, luxury vacations, or investment opportunities that reflected their growing wealth. I had to appear impressed by their financial achievements while hiding the fact that my own income was substantial enough to afford similar luxuries if I chose to pursue them. The psychological toll of living this double life became apparent during my second year of operational assignments, when the constant need to monitor my words and actions created a level of stress that affected my sleep, appetite, and overall well-being. The satisfaction I derived from my work was genuine and significant, but it was accompanied by loneliness and frustration that couldn't be addressed through normal social support systems. Dr. Vasquez had warned me about these challenges during my initial briefing, and the agency provided counseling services specifically designed for personnel in covered positions. But utilizing these resources required acknowledging that the career path I had chosen came with personal costs that might not be sustainable indefinitely. The counseling sessions helped me develop strategies for managing the stress of maintaining operational security while preserving important family relationships. The counselor, Dr. Maria Santos, specialized in working with intelligence personnel and understood the unique pressures created by living a classified life while maintaining connections to people who couldn't know the truth about my work. The key is finding ways to be authentic about your values and emotions even when you can't be specific about your activities, she explained during one particularly helpful session. Your family's concern comes from love, not judgment. You can acknowledge their care while redirecting conversations toward aspects of your life that you can discuss openly. This advice proved valuable for managing family dinners and social situations where my career inevitably became a topic of conversation. I learned to focus on the aspects of museum work that I could discuss honestly while avoiding details that might reveal the classified components of my actual responsibilities. But the fundamental tension remained unresolved. I was doing exactly the kind of meaningful, challenging work that my family wanted for me, but the security requirements meant that they would continue to worry about my limited prospects until some future revelation allowed them to understand what I had actually achieved. The breaking point in my family's patience with my career choices came during Jessica's engagement party, a lavish celebration that brought together her Wall Street colleagues, Alex's startup associates, and extended family members who hadn't seen me in months. The event was held at an exclusive Manhattan restaurant where the cost of dinner probably exceeded my apparent monthly salary, creating an atmosphere where my modest lifestyle seemed even more inadequate by comparison. Jessica had been promoted to vice president at Goldman Sachs just weeks before announcing her engagement to Marcus, a hedge fund manager whose casual mention of seven-figure bonuses made even her impressive income seem modest. The celebration was as much about their combined professional success as their personal relationship, with conversations naturally focusing on career achievements and financial milestones that highlighted my apparent lack of progress. Alex arrived directly from a meeting with venture capitalists who had just agreed to invest another $25 million in his company, giving him a net worth that approached 8 figures while he was still in his mid-20s. His casual confidence and obvious success made him the center of attention among family friends who wanted to understand how someone so young had achieved such remarkable financial results. The contrast with my situation became increasingly apparent as the evening progressed and conversations inevitably turned to career updates and future plans. Jessica's colleagues shared stories about international business trips, major client negotiations, and bonus structures that reflected the high-stakes nature of investment banking. Alex's associates discussed product launches, market expansion strategies, and acquisition opportunities that demonstrated the rapid growth of his technology ventures. When attention eventually focused on me, the familiar pattern of polite interest, followed by awkward silence, became more pronounced than usual. My explanations about museum security work seemed particularly inadequate in a room full of people who measured success in terms of revenue generation, market share, and professional recognition that translated directly into social status. Sarah works in security at the Metropolitan Museum, my mother explained to a group of Jessica's colleagues, her voice carrying the defensive tone that had become increasingly common when she discussed my career. She's responsible for protecting all those priceless artworks and artifacts. Very important work, really. The polite smiles and brief nods that followed this introduction revealed exactly how impressed these financial professionals were by museum security work. Their conversations quickly returned to discussions of market trends and investment strategies that excluded me entirely, leaving me standing awkwardly at the edge of groups where I had nothing meaningful to contribute. The most painful moment came when Marcus, Jessica's fiancé, attempted to include me in a conversation about career advancement by offering advice based on his understanding of my situation. His comments, while well-intentioned, revealed assumptions about my capabilities and ambitions that were both inaccurate and humiliating. Security work is actually a growing field with good prospects if you get the right certifications, he said, speaking with the confident authority of someone who had never struggled to find employment. Corporate security pays much better than museum work, and there are opportunities for advancement into risk management or executive protection. You should consider transitioning while you're still young enough to make a career change. His suggestion that I needed to escape my current position while I still could implied that museum security was suitable only for people without better options, and that staying longer would make me increasingly unemployable in more desirable fields. The fact that he was offering this advice in front of family members and their professional associates made it feel like a public diagnosis of my career failures. Jessica attempted to be supportive while also reinforcing the perception that I was underemployed and needed guidance to improve my situation. Sarah's really smart and capable, she told the group, using the tone reserved for defending someone whose choices seemed inexplicable. She just needs to find the right opportunity to showcase her talents. I keep telling her that with her analytical skills, she could do really well in business if she got the right training. The word "if" carried particular sting, suggesting that my current situation resulted from failure to pursue obvious opportunities rather than deliberate choices based on information that I couldn't share. Her defense, while loving, reinforced the general perception that I was someone who needed help and guidance rather than someone who had already found meaningful work. Alex tried a different approach, focusing on the technology aspects of modern security systems and suggesting ways that I could develop marketable skills while continuing my current employment. His advice was practical and reflected genuine understanding of how technical capabilities could enhance career prospects in almost any field. Every industry is becoming more data-driven, he explained to the group, including me in the conversation while also educating others about trends that affected their own professional development. Security systems generate huge amounts of information that needs analysis and interpretation. Sarah could develop those skills and position herself for opportunities in cybersecurity or data analytics. While his suggestions were more realistic than Marcus's assumptions about corporate security work, they still carried the implication that I needed to acquire additional capabilities to escape the limitations of my current position. The subtext was that museum security work couldn't provide the foundation for building a substantial career without significant supplementation from other sources. The conversation gradually shifted away from my situation as others began discussing their own professional challenges and opportunities. But the damage to my confidence and family relationships had already been done. The public nature of the advice and analysis made it clear that my career choices had become a source of general concern rather than just private family discussions. Later in the evening, during a quieter moment between courses, my father approached me with the kind of serious expression that indicated he had been thinking carefully about how to address my situation. His words, delivered with obvious love but also unmistakable frustration, crystallized years of accumulated worry about my life trajectory. "Sarah, I need to ask you something directly," he said, his voice carrying the weight of parental responsibility and genuine concern. "Are you happy with where your life is going? Because from the outside, it looks like you're stuck in a job that isn't challenging you or providing the kind of future that your education should have made possible." The directness of his question demanded an honest response, but the classified nature of my actual work meant that I couldn't provide the reassurance he was seeking. The gap between his perception and my reality had become so large that bridging it would require revelations that could destroy my career and compromise ongoing operations. "I'm learning a lot in my current position," I replied, trying to sound confident while avoiding specific commitments about future plans. "The museum environment provides opportunities that aren't immediately obvious from the outside. I think my experience there will ultimately lead to possibilities that might surprise everyone." My father's expression suggested that this response was exactly what he had feared hearing. Rather than providing reassurance about my professional development, it confirmed his suspicion that I was rationalizing a situation that objectively represented underemployment and limited prospects. "Sweetheart, I know you want to be optimistic, but sometimes being realistic is more important than being hopeful," he said with the patience of someone who had been having similar conversations for years. "Your siblings have built careers that provide security, recognition, and opportunities for continued growth. I want the same things for you, but it seems like you're not taking the steps necessary to achieve them." The comparison to Jessica and Alex was inevitable but particularly painful in the context of their obvious success and the celebration of their achievements that surrounded us. Their career paths had followed predictable trajectories that everyone could understand and evaluate, while my situation remained mysterious and apparently stagnant despite my educational background and demonstrated capabilities. The evening concluded with family members and friends offering various forms of encouragement and advice that revealed how completely they misunderstood my actual circumstances. Their concern was genuine and their suggestions were well-intentioned, but the gap between their perception and my reality made their support feel more like additional pressure to abandon work that had finally provided the professional satisfaction I had been seeking. The drive home that night was one of the loneliest experiences of my adult life. I was surrounded by people who cared about me deeply but couldn't understand or appreciate what I was actually accomplishing. The meaningful work that brought purpose and excitement to my daily life remained invisible to the family members whose opinions mattered most to me personally. The realization that this situation would continue indefinitely unless something dramatic happened to reveal the true nature of my work made the personal costs of my career choice feel almost unbearable. I was successful in ways that my family desperately wanted me to be, but the security requirements meant that their concern and disappointment would persist regardless of my actual achievements. The moment when my carefully constructed double life nearly collapsed came during what should have been a routine family gathering 3 months after Jessica's engagement party. My parents had invited everyone for Sunday dinner, a tradition that had become increasingly stressful as the gap between my apparent career stagnation and my siblings' continued success grew more pronounced with each passing month. I arrived at my parents' house directly from a classified briefing at the operations center, where I had spent the morning analyzing intelligence reports about a major trafficking network that was planning to smuggle stolen Byzantine artifacts from Greece to private collectors in the United States. The operation required immediate coordination with Greek authorities and would likely result in arrests within the next 48 hours. The intellectual excitement and professional satisfaction of contributing to such an important investigation stood in stark contrast to the family dynamics I encountered when I walked into my childhood home. The conversation centered around Alex's latest business triumph, a partnership with a major technology company that would expand his platform internationally and potentially increase his company's valuation to over $100 million. Jessica was equally excited about her own recent achievements, having just completed a merger negotiation that generated substantial fees for her firm and positioned her for promotion to senior vice president before her 30th birthday. Her engagement to Marcus had also been featured in the society pages of several magazines, highlighting their combined wealth and professional success in ways that made them local celebrities within their social circles. The stark contrast between their public achievements and my apparent lack of progress created an atmosphere where my very presence felt like a reminder of unfulfilled potential and missed opportunities. My parents tried to include me in the celebrations, but their efforts only highlighted how little they had to celebrate about my own life. "Sarah's been working on some special projects at the museum," my mother offered during a lull in the conversation about Alex's international expansion plans. "She's been traveling more lately for professional development opportunities." The mention of my travel schedule was an attempt to suggest professional growth, but it had the unintended consequence of drawing attention to aspects of my life that I couldn't discuss openly. Jessica immediately picked up on this detail and began asking questions that revealed how little she actually knew about my daily responsibilities. "What kind of professional development?" she asked with the genuine interest of someone who understood the importance of continuing education in building successful careers. "Are you taking courses in art history or museum administration? I know several people who've made good transitions from cultural institutions to corporate roles by developing the right additional skills." Her questions were reasonable and reflected her sincere desire to help me advance professionally, but they required explanations that would either involve outright lies or reveal information that could compromise my security clearance. The travel I had been doing was related to surveillance operations and coordination meetings with international law enforcement agencies, not the museum training programs that my family assumed explained my occasional absences. "It's mostly specialized security training in coordination with other institutions," I replied, trying to provide enough detail to satisfy curiosity while avoiding specifics that might raise additional questions. "Museums share information about best practices and emerging threats, so there are regular conferences and workshops that help us stay current with industry developments." Alex immediately saw opportunities to connect my work with technology trends that interested him professionally. "The security industry is becoming incredibly sophisticated with facial recognition systems, predictive analytics, and integrated surveillance networks," he said with enthusiasm that reflected his genuine interest in helping me understand market opportunities. "If you're getting exposure to those technologies, you could potentially transition to cybersecurity or corporate risk management where the money is much better." His suggestion that I use museum experience as a stepping stone to more lucrative technology careers was both logical and frustrating, since it assumed that my current work lacked the complexity and importance that would make it intrinsically valuable. The irony was that my actual responsibilities involved exactly the kind of sophisticated technology and analytical work that he was describing, but at levels of classification that made corporate security seem mundane by comparison. The conversation took a more serious turn when my father raised concerns that had clearly been troubling him for months. His approach was direct but gentle, reflecting years of parental worry about my life trajectory and future prospects. "Sarah, we need to have an honest conversation about your plans," he said, using the tone reserved for important family discussions. "You've been in the same position for almost 4 years now, and from what we can see, you're not making the kind of progress that someone with your abilities should be achieving. We're concerned that you're not being realistic about what this job can offer you long term." The directness of his concern demanded a response that I couldn't provide without revealing classified information or compromising ongoing operations. My actual career progression had been remarkable, with responsibilities and security clearances that most federal employees never achieved. But the cover requirements meant that this advancement remained invisible to people who judged success by conventional metrics like salary increases, title changes, and public recognition. "I understand your concern," I replied, trying to acknowledge their feelings while avoiding commitments that would conflict with my actual responsibilities. "But I think there are opportunities developing that might surprise everyone. The work I'm doing is more complex and important than it appears from the outside." My mother leaned forward with the expression of someone who had been hoping for exactly this kind of conversation. "Sweetheart, we know you're intelligent and capable, but intelligence and capability need to be channeled toward goals that provide security and advancement. What specific opportunities are you talking about? What concrete steps are you taking to build on your experience?" The questions were entirely reasonable from parents who wanted to understand their daughter's career strategy and ensure that she was making decisions based on realistic assessments of her prospects. But providing the specific information they requested would require discussing classified operations, international law enforcement coordination, and intelligence analysis work that couldn't be acknowledged outside secure facilities. The situation became more complicated when Jessica offered to make specific introductions and networking opportunities that reflected her genuine desire to help me transition to what she considered more suitable employment. Her connections in the financial industry included people who worked in corporate security, risk management, and compliance roles that seemed like logical next steps for someone with my background. "I know the head of security at JP Morgan Chase," she said, pulling out her phone to check her contacts. "He's always looking for people with investigative experience and analytical skills. The salary would be at least double what you're making now, with real opportunities for advancement into executive positions." Her offer was generous and reflected the kind of family support that most people would appreciate deeply. But accepting would require abandoning work that had finally provided the professional satisfaction I had been seeking since graduation, while also potentially compromising my security clearance and disqualifying me from continued involvement in operations that were genuinely important to national security. "I appreciate the offer," I said, trying to sound grateful while buying time to formulate a response that wouldn't create additional family tensions. "But I think I need to see where my current path leads before making major changes. There are some developments that might change the whole equation." Alex interpreted this response as indication that I was finally taking practical steps to advance my career, and he immediately offered additional support that demonstrated the family's collective desire to help me succeed. "If you're considering corporate security or risk management, I could introduce you to some venture capital firms that specialize in security technology," he suggested with obvious enthusiasm. "They're always looking for people who understand both the technical and operational sides of the industry. Your museum experience would actually be valuable because cultural institutions deal with high-value assets and sophisticated threats." The irony of his suggestion was that it accurately described aspects of my actual work while completely missing the classified nature of my responsibilities and the international scope of the operations I was involved in. His offer to help me transition to corporate security roles reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of what I was already accomplishing within the intelligence community. The family dinner concluded with everyone feeling frustrated about different aspects of the conversation. My parents remained concerned about my apparent lack of concrete career planning. Jessica and Alex were puzzled by my reluctance to accept networking opportunities that seemed obviously beneficial. I was exhausted by the need to deflect legitimate questions while maintaining relationships with people who couldn't understand the reality of my professional life. The emotional toll of these family interactions was becoming unsustainable, especially as my work responsibilities intensified and required increasing travel and irregular schedules that would be difficult to explain without better cover stories. The gap between my actual achievements and my family's understanding of my situation was creating stress that affected both my personal relationships and my professional performance. Dr. Santos, during our next counseling session, helped me understand that the crisis I was experiencing reflected the natural tensions created by long-term cover assignments rather than personal failures or relationship problems that could be easily resolved. "The strain you're feeling is completely normal for someone in your position," she explained with the insight of someone who had counseled many intelligence personnel through similar challenges. "The people who care about you most are also the people who are most invested in understanding and supporting your career development. When they can't access accurate information about your professional life, their concern manifests as pressure to make changes that would actually represent steps backward from your perspective." Her analysis helped me understand that the family tensions weren't necessarily permanent or indicative of fundamental relationship problems. But it also confirmed that the situation would likely continue to deteriorate unless something happened to reveal the true nature of my work or allow me to transition to positions where my achievements could be acknowledged publicly. The realization that I might have to choose between my professional advancement and my family relationships created anxiety that began affecting my sleep, appetite, and overall well-being. The work I was doing was exactly what I had always wanted, but the personal costs were higher than I had anticipated when I accepted Dr. Vasquez's original offer. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.